The Wars of the Roses was a 30-year-long series of bloody civil wars for control over the throne of England, fought throughout the Middle Ages between two English rival branches of the royal house of Plantagenet, the House of Lancaster and the House of York. The foundations of the Wars of the Roses were laid in 1377, when King Edward III died. His oldest son and heir to the throne, Edward, also known as the Black Prince, died a year before his father, so succeeding to the throne after the death of King Edward III was the Black Prince's 10-year-old son, King Richard II. This skipping an entire generation, passing ahead of King Edward III's three surviving sons, leaving lingering claims to the throne among the descendants of houses Lancaster and York. In 1399, Richard II's cousin deposes him from the throne, becoming King Henry IV, establishing Lancastrian rule. Despite repeated uprisings, his reign remained secure, passing to his son, King Henry V. But in 1422, Henry V dies unexpectedly, leaving the throne to his infant son, King Henry VI. And as Henry VI gets older, he is advised to marry French Margaret of Anjou as a mutually beneficial truce between France and England. In 1453, King Henry suffers from a mental breakdown, and Richard, Duke of York, is made protector of the realm. But the king recovers in 1455, and Richard of York's position is revoked. York and his allies then raised their armies in the north and marched south towards London to confront King Henry. After several hours of failed negotiations, on the 22nd of May 1455, the fight between the Red Rose of Lancaster and the White Rose of York began, the First Battle of St. Albans, marking the beginning of the Wars of the Roses. The bloody fighting between Yorkist and Lancastrian armies ended in a Yorkist victory. Richard of York was restored as Lord Protector of England and had himself and his heirs designated to succeed to the throne. But the wars didn't end here. In 1460, Lancastrian armies are assembled under the charge of Margaret of Anjou, and a number of more wars take place between the two houses. Richard of York dies in the Battle of Wakefield in the late 1460s. But his son, Edward, then claims victory in the Battle of Taunton in 1461 and gets crowned King Edward IV. Edward was arranged to marry a French princess, but instead he secretly married Elizabeth of Woodville, whose family was considered as mid-ranked. This would cause the noblemen to turn against Edward to the Lancasters. And in 1470, England was invaded by Lancastrian armies. Edward was forced to flee, and Henry was placed back on the throne. But this wouldn't last. Edward invaded England in 1471. King Henry and Margaret were both taken captured, and their only son killed in battle. Margaret would then return to France, and Henry would die in captivity. Edward's power was restored and the remainder of his rule was peaceful, but after his death in 1483, the wars would continue. Edward's brother Richard questioned the legitimacy of Edward's sons due to his secret marriage. He threw the boys in prison. He then took the throne as King Richard III. His power seemed secure, but in 1485, Henry Tudor, a direct Lancastrian descendant, would defeat Richard III in the Battle of Bosworth and claim the throne, becoming King Henry VII of England, and by marrying Elizabeth of York, daughter of King Edward IV, would join the Red Rose of Lancaster and the White Rose of York to become the House of Tudor and ending the Wars of the Roses.